Okay, we are live now. We had some technical difficulties, but we are back. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I am so thrilled to be speaking with Dr. Ashley Robertson Preston this evening. We have known each other for many, many years, and she is a real Bethune scholar. I'm telling y'all, you all are in for a treat. Dr. Preston has spent years studying about Mary McLeod Bethune, her work, not only here in the United States, but globally. And I really wanted to share that with audiences, especially my Bethune-Cookman Wildcats alumni. We know all about Mary McLeod Bethune, but how wonderful to know more about her and all the work she did, just not here in the United States, but globally. So come on in and join us. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. Preston, and then we're going to get into some questions. I'm just going to have a conversation, y'all. This is my sis, so it's going to be real chill, relaxed. I want you guys to go ahead and drop some comments and some questions for Dr. Preston. There is nothing off limit. Well, it may be some things off limit, but we are going to have fun this evening. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dr. Preston, her work, and we'll get started here. So, Dr. Ashley Robertson Preston is an author, curator, and assistant professor of history at Howard University. Her past positions include serving as director of the Mary McLeod Bethune Foundation, National Historic Landmark at Bethune-Cookman University, Hell Wildcats. She was also an archives technician for the National Archives for Black Women's History at the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Site. She is the author of Mary McLeod Bethune in Florida, Bringing Social Justice to the Sunshine State, which examines how the educator rose to prominence while fighting for equality at the height of racial unrest in the state. Dr. Preston's second book, because she's writing, y'all, Mary McLeod Bethune, the Pan-Africanist, published with the University Press of Florida, examines the international activism of Bethune. She has published in the Journal of Negro Education, Salon, Journal of Black Studies, and Journal of African American History. And Dr. Preston's research interest focuses on the activism of Black women during the early 20th century and the ways in which they uplifted their communities, created institutions, and stood against systematic racism. Now, in addition to her work as a historian, she is the founder of the nonprofit Carter G Cares, inspired by her son, who was born prematurely at 28 weeks. The organization raises awareness and provides support for NICU families and high-risk mothers. Now, listen, she is not just a Bethune scholar, historian, teaching at Howard University. She is a mother who founded a nonprofit, Carter G Cares, for her son, inspiring him being in a NICU, and she is helping some women. So, without further ado, I want to introduce to you Dr. Ashley Robertson Preston. Hello, Dr. Preston.
Hey, how are you tonight?
I am well. Thank you for joining us. Now, you know, I never call you Dr. Preston, so this is a little different.
I'm here. I'm glad to be here. I was sending out some messages trying to get the people on the YouTube.
Yes, come
And
on
if you
in.
missed us, you'll see us on the replay.
Yes, because we will be sure that people see this. And I'm just thrilled that you are joining us this evening. I tell a little background, little story before we get into it. Met Dr. Preston after she took over the Mary McLeod Bethune Foundation where I worked. And y'all, listen, this is a funny story. She invited me to come on to the campus to, do a speak about Mary McLeod Bethune at her birthday celebration. I was so thrilled, excited, came, left, and I was like, I don't think she liked me. But so much going on that day. And y'all, we have become, sisters in museum, in our work. And Dr. Preston has spent many years and taught me so much about Mary McLeod Bethune. So knowing that Dr. Preston has spent all this time not only studying her work here in the United States, but also globally, I have learned so much. And she's written this latest book because, yeah, I got my copy. Y'all need to get y'all a copy. And later on, we're going to give y'all a discount code, but get your book. Her second book here, and that journey was just an amazing one, talking about Mary McLeod Bethune and her international work. So, Dr. Preston, I want to get into the first question. How do you define Pan Africanism, and why do you think Mary McLeod Bethune has not been identified as one? And I mean, I have my own thoughts, but tell us why you think she has not been defined as that.
So first, I want to say thank you. Can you hear me? I'm okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I got my headphones on. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for Heritage Salon, all of the great Black History Month posts that you all put out, and just for continuing to give historians a platform. Many of us are so busy in the classrooms and so busy at conferences and all of these different things that we don't have the time sometimes to, create these types of opportunities. So thank you for what you're doing with Heritage Salon in bringing history to the people, public history. That's what I do and that's what I believe in. So thank you so much on this Women's History Month. Starting with this new book, Mary McLeod Bethune, the Pan-Africanist. This book was a labor of love. It started as a dissertation. In 2010, I came to Howard University. Didn't know what I was going to write about. Dr. Clark Lewis came into my classroom. I have to tell this story every time because it just means so much to me that she really told me to go to the Bethune House in DC, and she told me to go volunteer, go find a job there. And, she really pointed me to the Mary McLeod Bethune story. And at the time, my major was African diaspora. So in my mind, I didn't think that I would find anything on Mrs. Bethune. So I saw two things. I saw that she had won the Haitian Medal of Honor and Merit, and I also, saw that she had won the Liberian Star of Africa. When I saw those two things, I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting that she, was in Liberia and Haiti, but I thought that was just two little, trips that she had possibly taken. And I started to really discover that she was very well traveled. While I worked at Bethune-Cookman, I actually had a chance to see her first passport. And just seeing that passport and hold it in my hands, I was like, wow, the things that I had written about and researched about, I saw the actual tangible, I saw the actual passport and was able to hold it and help preserve it during the time that I was running the Bethune House in Daytona Beach, Florida. And so when we look at this idea of a Pan-Africanist, first, I want to read the definition that I use. And I think this is really important because sometimes we throw phrases around, we throw words around without really investigating their meaning. And so according to P. Alasawuche's, I think I'm saying his middle name wrong, but his last name is Esadebe. He has an excellent book on Pan-Africanism, and this is one of the books that I was using to study for my comprehensive exams at Howard University. And one of the topics that we studied working on the diaspora major was Pan-Africanism. And so we talked about Marcus Garvey and all of the great things that he's done. We talked about W.E.B. Du Bois and the Pan-African Congresses. And never did we talk about Mrs. Bethune. And so Pan-Africanism within itself is a very male-dominated conversation. Many times when you're talking about any women that were Pan-Africanist, they'll say, oh, well, she was a Garveyite. She's a part of the Marcus Garvey movement. When we talk about Malcolm X's parents, they were followers of Marcus Garvey. And so those types of people can be associated with Pan-Africanism because they were a part of the organization. or if you were an attendee at the Du Bois Pan-African Congresses. Okay, then that woman can be a Pan-Africanist. So they are attaching them being a Pan-Africanist to those men who are leading those organizations. But I found that Mrs. Bethune, she was a part of neither organization. Pan-Africanism is a political and cultural phenomenon which regards Africa, Africans, and African descendants abroad as a unit. So all Black people are one. It seeks to regenerate and unify Africa and promote a feeling of oneness among the people of the African world, uniting Black people wherever they are throughout this diaspora. Diaspora simply means the dispersal of people of African descent. That's the way that we're using it. It glorifies the African past and inculcates pride in African values. So, Africa, being proud of being African, seeing yourself as being one with other people of African descent, feeling that you have unity between people of African descent. This idea that Africa is the homeland of Black people. And these are things that Mrs. Bethune believed in. One of her most famous quotes, "The drums of Africa still beat in my heart." People throw that around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Why is this woman talking about Africa? Why is she, saying that this is her home? When she goes to Liberia in 1952, she said, "I'm home." She literally, when she steps foot on the continent, talks about how she feels as if she's finally home. And when she returns to the United States, she encourages African Americans to go out and visit Liberia, or visit another place on the continent, and to also consider moving to those places. Consider taking your talents and skills to these different places. So these are the same things that Du Bois was doing. These are the same things Marcus Garvey, known for his Back to Africa movement. Mrs. Bethune didn't lead a Back to Africa movement, but she definitely encouraged African Americans to give thought to going back to Africa.
Mm-hmm. Wow. See, you still teaching me right now. It's amazing. I remember working in Mrs. Bethune's home and reading somewhere that she wanted to be a missionary and wanted to go, overseas to be able to give back and everything. So can you share if that is what prompted Mrs. Bethune to have this interest in international work and travel? Is that yearning, that burning desire to go over as a missionary?
So that's such an overlooked part of her story. I think because she didn't actually get to go to Africa as a missionary. But in the book, I talk about how we kind of skate past that, but I stopped at that point to really just examine how important it is that she had this mindset of going to Africa, this mindset that she would take all of her gifts and talents and resources, and she wanted to be of service in Africa. She believed that religion was a tool of empowerment. And so for her, being a missionary was, that was going to be the ultimate job. And so when we look at her earlier years, they're very important to her life, because when she's in South Carolina, in her home, this is where she learns about her grandmother being from the continent. This is where she learns about her family connection to the continent. And so, and in South Carolina is also where she hears about this idea of becoming a missionary and going to Africa. So many different seeds were planted in Mrs. Bethune's life in her first 20 years of living. And some of those years, of course, are spent in South Carolina.
Yeah, and knowing she was an educator, that's all that she wanted to do, and she did that, of course, her entire life, among other things. So, as you know, I love my historical photos. I give me a computer in the archives, honey, and I'm on there finding the photo. So, of course, I've read both of your books, and located a photo in the book because you found some fantastic photos. I'm just like, I missed all of this in 1995 when I was at the foundation. But I located this.
Those photos weren't there.
Oh, they weren't there. Oh, see, well, I didn't miss it.
Oh no. These photos actually were at the council house. Bethune didn't. Bethune didn't have them.
Oh,
They were at the
okay.
most of the photos in this book came from the council house in Washington D.C. Shout out
Okay.
to Ranger John Fowler and also Kenneth Chandler.
Yes.
They were so gracious in helping me locate all of these photos. And when I tell you they have been preserved, I mean,
Oh, that's a whole nother that's
and
another talk about preserving our photos and documents.
you got to get the guy, the Kappa historian back.
Yes, yes, Mr. Kevin Scott. Hey, Mr. Scott. Man, those Kappas, y'all better Divine Nine, find those Kappas in their archives. But listen, Dr. Preston, I found that photo of her with the Madam Pundit. That was the Indian diplomat. She was connected. We all know about her and Mrs. Roosevelt. We'll talk about that later. But tell us about some of the other individuals in the global community she was connected with. Because, we love to just go straight to Mrs. Roosevelt. That's our claim to fame. Sometimes we'll skip over Franklin Roosevelt to jump to Eleanor Roosevelt. But there were many, many, many other people and funders and wealthy white men that donated to the college and all different type of people. Tell us a little bit about the global community, the leaders that she was connected to, more than just Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah, I want to go back to Madam Pandit. You put you showed the photo the other day of her and Madam Pandit, and I could just do a study on Madam Pandit, to be honest with you. She was a freedom fighter during the time that India was colonized by the British. She had been jailed several times for her activism. Her and Mrs. Bethune met at the meeting that was actually that led to the founding of the United Nations. They were both in attendance, and so you have this freedom fighter from India, one of the few women of color, of course, that is in attendance at this meeting that is the founding of the United Nations. And so her and Mrs. Bethune connect, and she ends up really enlightening Mrs. Bethune a lot on issues that were concerning India. At one point, India was going through a drought, and we look at the United States response in terms of giving them grain, which giving them food, and you see Mrs. Bethune even speaking out on some of those different issues. And so I think with her relationship with Madam Pandit, she becomes more knowledgeable of Indian affairs, and not only that, Indians become aware of Mrs. Bethune. In the book, I have letters from people in India who are writing to her, who are well aware of her work, who are aware of the college. They are asking about her, how she is, and they even reference her being being a descendant of Africa. So they know that these are things that she has said. So you see, like, this relationship with Indians that develops through her relationship with Madam Pandit. Another group that she connects with is a group called the Hour a Day Study Club. And these are women who are in Canada. Hey, Dr. Hutchins, that's my girl. These are women who are in Canada. And in fact, this was an organization that was started in 1934 in Canada. And today it is I want to make sure I'm getting this right. I had to write it down. It is the oldest African Canadian organization. It was a group of women who got together and decided that they would better themselves by reading and studying an hour a day. That's what it's called, the Hour a Day Study Club. It's a nonprofit
Whoa.
that now helps Afro-Canadian students with scholarships. But at the time, they invited Mrs. Bethune to Canada in 1954, And it was there that she attends and speaks at this emancipation celebration. The women host her. There was a woman that I met by the name of Miss Harding Davis. I literally typed in the Hour a Day Study Club on Facebook, found the group. They ended up, I messaged them on Facebook. They messaged me back. They showed me the picture and connected me with the museum that had the picture of when Mrs. Bethune visited. And Miss Harding Davis shared a personal account about Mrs. Bethune's visit. She was a child, and she talked about how the visit made the newspapers. And you'll have to read the book to figure out why.
If you all don't get this book, I'm telling you this. Do you hear this? She's talking about a personal account. This woman is still alive and talking about Mrs. Bethune visit to Canada. I'm telling y'all, this is we gonna get that cold in a little while. Just be ready. Y'all want to get this book now. Let's. I'm gonna skip around a little bit because this has been burning me. I talked to you about this offline, but I want to get into this because right now there is a book with Eleanor Roosevelt and Mrs. Bethune, which is a novel, which is fiction, which means it is not true for the audience. Just in case y'all didn't know, it's a novel. It's not true. But there is so much speculation about the relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune. Now, when I worked as a little tour guide down at the foundation house, the pink room, as everyone knows that's been in the house, is considered Eleanor Roosevelt's room. And really, the way we described it was that she was like her best friend. She was always there. In my book that I wrote, it's a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt on a visit. There are tons of pictures of them all over the place. And it paints this picture of this, it really does paint a picture of this very close relationship, like they were, I mean, bosom buddies. Now, but I know as a public historian, here we are, we research, we get to the primary source, we get to the receipts, as they say. You did the research, you saw the receipts, you understand that real relationship between Mrs. Bethune and Mrs. Roosevelt. Tell us about what you, let's spill the tea on tonight, Dr. Preston. What was this relationship? Because I wanted to be debunked today on this platform. Jada Wright Green, founder and editor of Heritage Salon, Mary McLeod Bethune, lover, Bethune Cookman Wildcat. I want the truth out here. Let's tell the truth. What was their relationship?
So I'm actually working on my next book project, and part of that book will address this issue. Um, yes, I'm gonna put receipts in the next book. But I want to say first of all that make no mistake that the relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Mrs. Bethune at the time was a big deal. It was a big deal that Mrs. Bethune had access to her. It was a big deal that Mrs. Bethune could call on her. Um, it was major that she could go into the White House and all of these things. I mean, Mrs. Bethune was at the height of her career during her work with the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration. But make no mistake that this was political. A lot of this was political. Um, when we look at the African American voters at that time, African Americans had largely voted Republican. And so when we look at this shift to the Democratic Party, Mrs. Bethune played a large role in that. Her work with the Black Cabinet, her work with the National Youth Administration as the director of the Division of Negro Affairs. In this position, she was bringing resources to the Black community through her work with the Roosevelt administration. And so when we look at Mrs. Bethune at the time, she is the face, she is one of the many faces of the Democratic Party that is able to help bring Black voters into the fold. And so this relationship is not as rosy as people think. For example, in letters, and I looked at tons of names between the two of them, and we see Mrs. Bethune writing these very long letters, and she's listing all of these different things that she needs. She's, on her gravesite, it says, "Not for myself, but for others." And when I tell you that woman was going on behalf of everyone, she was asking about jobs. She was asking them to investigate different situations, cases of discrimination. I mean, you name it, she did it. She asked. They may not have said yes, but she would ask. And so she has all of these different letters to Eleanor Roosevelt. And some of these letters are really long. And the response is, the secretary saying, "Mrs. Roosevelt cannot do this. Have a good day." So this is not like your girlfriend where you're kikiing and, like, "Hey, girl," a lot of Mrs. Bethune's letters are very long, and she's telling her how, "My health, I'm doing well, this is what's going on the campus," and she's getting these really short, really direct letters back. So this doesn't look like the people hanging out in Kiki in the way we would think that it would be. But, she does get a lot accomplished because of this relationship. And so, for example, when we look at the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, we see Black women serving in these roles. And the first time that Black women will serve in these roles, that will be going into the military. First time they'll serve in roles other than nurses within the military. And so Black WACs are becoming a part of this because Mrs. Bethune puts the pressure on First Lady Roosevelt to make this happen. In her book, Justice Older Than the Law, Ms. W. Johnson Roundtree, who passed away at 100 years old a couple of years ago, she says, I heard Mrs. Bethune with her cane, "I want my girls involved." And she was talking to First Lady Roosevelt. And so, she's putting the pressure on her. And so there are so many things that I think Eleanor Roosevelt gets the credit for in terms of things that are really ideas that Mrs. Bethune was in the background pushing for. And so, Eleanor Roosevelt grew up very privileged. She never knew Black people for the most part growing up. And so Mrs. Bethune really put her on to game. Like, she put her on to what was going on in the Black community. She's the one that was like, "Okay, girl, this is what's going on in South Carolina. Can you intervene? Because it's not looking good." So, she's the voice. She's the one. And, it worked in her favor. But, it's not as if Eleanor Roosevelt and FDR were just, her besties. Like, this is primarily political for the most part.
Yeah. And we don't talk about that, but that's what it was. But I love that you hear that you say that Mr. Bethune was hitting her cane. And I always tell this story if you ever hear me talk about it. And I told you this. I never heard her voice until I went to the archives at the council house. And her voice is so light. I'm thinking it's deep but this woman just had the audacity to ask. She was not afraid, the boldness to be able to ask for things to anybody. She did not care. And the grassroots approach to fundraising, we all know the sweet potato pies. She wasn't above anything asking or whatever. And just so you describing her, right? You're writing these long letters. I can just see her because she was not going to stop. She was not going to stop. I reading your book and knowing that Mrs. Bethune went to Cuba. You talk about that in the first book that y'all need to get.
I'm trying to find it. I got it in here somewhere.
That first, especially these Floridians. These Floridians, y'all need to know what Mrs. Bethune, did in Florida, the social justice. But you talk about her. There were visitors from Cuba around 1950 to the school, to Bethune-Cookman. Again, Hell Wildcats, love my school. Um, and there were students that were actually enrolled during this time. I want you to talk a little bit about her trip to Cuba in 1930, though, and how she tried to cultivate this relationship between Americans and Afro Cubans.
Yes, and let me just say too, I want to go back to something about the besties because she did have a bestie, and one of her besties was Charlotte Hawkins Brown, and Charlotte Hawkins Brown had a school in North Carolina, and another one of her very close friends was Nanny Helen Burroughs, and she had a school in Washington D.C. And the three of them called themselves the three B's of education: Bethune, Brown, and Burroughs.
Not have a nickname in here. Come on
The
now.
bees of education,
The bees of education.
not Beyonce, the original beehive,
The original Beyonce.
the OG beehive. So she actually had best friends
Hmm.
that she could share her struggles with, who were in
Hmm.
very similar situations because
Hmm.
they too were women who were basically building schools from very humble beginnings. So
Hmm.
those are the women that she called her besties. Um,
Yes.
her relationships with Afro Cubans. Um, there was a man. Oh my goodness. I want to say it was. Oh my goodness. What is her? I'm trying to think of the name of her godson. Oh my gosh, who was at Bethune Cookman. He was Cuban. I know you know his name.
Not Edward
Remember he?
Rodriguez.
Yes. Woo. Huh? Yes,
Mr.
Edward
Rodriguez on that picture.
Rodriguez.
Yes. Yes.
So Edward Rodriguez, he was Cuban, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
I did know that. Yes.
yes, so we talk about Afro Cubans and her relationships. Like there were relationships that were more like official, you know what I mean? But there's also people like Edward Rodriguez, who she actually brought Edward Rodriguez from Miami. She was in Miami and she saw him, and he was this young boy, and she said, "Why aren't you in school?" And she ended up finding out that he was orphaned. Hi, Andrea. She said, "Okay, three B's. Yes, honey, the beehive, original beehive. Get into that." But she saw him in Miami and ended up learning his story. He had been orphaned. She brought him to Bethune Cookman and she raised him as one of her sons. They became very close. And so her relationship with Afro Cubans, I'm going to talk about some other aspects of that. But even the young people that she's bringing in and who she is becoming really close with, he becomes one of them. He's like her son. And Mr. Bethune, her grandson, whom I was close with, he said Edward Rodriguez, he said Mother Dear could count on him. He said I was out in the world, but Mother Dear could always count on him. And he actually ended up working with her for the National Youth Administration. But we see her traveling to Cuba in 1930. We don't have a lot of information about her trip, but it does make the newspapers here in the United States and Canada because of the discrimination that she faced. She came with a party of people, and the people who were lighter skinned were able to pass through the checkpoints, but she was held at the checkpoint, and one of the officials had to actually come get her. And so Mr. Bethune, who passed away at 96, I believe, one of the first things that I asked him when I met him was about Cuba. And he showed me pictures of himself in Cuba. He says, I was young, but I just remember being in the hot sun, just waiting. And his story matched up to what I had found in the research about her actually being stopped at this checkpoint and having to wait outside, in Cuba before being officially allowed into the country. And so there was a lot of outrage in the United States about her treatment, and also in some of the Afro Cuban newspapers. in there also about, what had happened. But she was not deterred by it. And she, when she came back, she said, well, I'm going to send and I'm going to visit again and I'm going to make sure that I encourage, she says, right thinking Negroes. I guess she's saying, like, the best of the best or whatever. But I'm going to encourage right thinking Negroes to visit Cuba. And so in 1940, NCNW actually takes a trip to Cuba at the urging of Mrs. Bethune, but also with Miss Sue Bailey Thurman, who is Howard Thurman, a
Yes.
very influential theologian who's from Daytona Beach. His wife is actually leading the trip. Mrs. Bethune had pneumonia. I think she had pneumonia or something that summer, and she ended up getting sick, so she didn't go. But NCNW went to Cuba on their first international trip.
Wow. Yeah, because I read that you talked about when she traveled, she would come back to the campus or back to Bethune-Cookman, and she would encourage people, go, learn, visit these places, understand. It was like she was really trying to introduce, us to something totally different than what we knew just in our own backyard. Always
Mm-hmm.
teaching us. But let me go back for a minute. You said that she was there in 1930. So if I'm not mistaken, let me, I don't have the receipts up. That was the time that she was operating as a president of the college.
Mm-hmm.
So wait, okay, let's put this in perspective. I just want y'all to understand this. This is 1930. There is no fax machine. There is no Zoom call. And Mrs. Bethune is on her. She's gone from the campus. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
she can't go in and have a Zoom meeting with a fund of y'all. She was overseas, even then working, doing international work, and being the president of Bethune Cookman. Okay, remember because
Mm-hmm.
Bethune Cookman College started in 1923. Okay, so it's 1930. That's phenomenal. I mean, this woman just did so much and continue to
Mm-hmm.
educate us. So let me ask you this. I saw that, and it always was like that when I was at Bethune Cookman. I remember being a hall monitor. My husband Daryl likes to. You were a hall monitor. It was basically an RA. It was another way to
You were
get. Listen,
you were RN, right?
RA, residential assistant. I was a hall monitor. It was another
Free
way to get.
housing. That's free housing. And
That's
a
free
big room.
housing.
All the
Miss
RNs had the big rooms with the personal bathroom.
by yourself. Now I didn't have a personal bathroom because I was in Curtis Hall at the time. But listen, you had a room by yourself, and I'm an only child. I wanted my own space. But anyway, when I was a hall monitor, Daryl, I know he's somewhere. Don't laugh. Anyway, we had a lot of
Hateration.
students that were from, international. They were from all over the Caribbean island. My big sis, my special Kamisha Whitaker. Shout out Kamisha. She's from Jamaica. Like there was so many different people. One of my line sisters from Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated were from the Bahamas and Jamaica and Africa. Mrs. Bethune had students from the Bahamas, Africa, Honduras. This was like 1948. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think attracted them to the school? Because that, again, y'all, this is not where you just picking up the telephone, you just hopping on a flight, you Zoom and you FaceTime. This is not happening in 1948. That was a big deal for you to leave your home country and travel and come to little old Daytona Beach, Florida, okay, to go to Bethune Cookman. Tell us, what do you think attracted them to the institution?
Yeah, so there's a really good book called Forging Diaspora by Frank Gurdy. And in this book, he talks about the relationship between African Americans and Afro Cubans. And he hones in on this idea of, Afro Cubans going to HBCUs. Specifically, he talks about them going to Tuskegee. And so when we look at the Harlem Renaissance, for example, one of the aspects that we often discuss is this influx of Afro Caribbean people from various places. But we talk about them going to Harlem. they're also going to these historically Black colleges and universities. And so if you look at Bethune Cookman, for example, that Bethune Cookman is there, it's in Florida. So it's one of the closest ones to some of these different areas. It's probably one of the closest HBCUs to Cuba. And so people of African descent who are from the Caribbean, they're going to these HBCUs also because of segregation. When you think about where they're going to be welcomed, HBCUs, of course, are going to welcome them with open arms. So segregation does play a role in that. But we see an influx of Afro Caribbean people coming to different colleges and universities. But Florida, in particular, was definitely a hot spot for those students.
Yes, I mean, I know people that came to Bethune and they flat out tell you, I want to come to the beach. They just wanted to be there. And it was a little walk over to the beach, but I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, so I was used to it and didn't miss it until I came back. But yeah, I could see that being one of the things that really attracted them to the school. And just Mrs. Bethune. I mean, I can
For sure.
imagine this woman convincing, just talking about the school and the students and all the variety of ways you can study and learn and research. And who would not want to sit at the feet of Mary McLeod Bethune? Okay, listen,
Mhm.
who didn't?
And it was
So last,
definitely her reputation, but her
yes,
reputation with Bethune, she her reputation as a Black leader, and the great things that she was doing spread throughout the diaspora. Like people knew who she was, and in fact, I talk about her being inducted into a Cuban Society of Arts and Letters, an
mhm.
organization of young people who are inducting her into this organization as an honorary member, kind of like a sorority. But she was already a member of sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, of course. But
Yes.
she becomes a member of the Cuban Society of Arts and Letters, and so Mrs. Bethune is recognized. And so yeah, that was another part of it. Let me plug up my computer.
Yes, and we know that she was an honorary member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Shout out. Uh I know. Yeah. Y'all. That's okay. Y'all got Mrs. Bethune. That's all right. And let's just see that notice that we both have our pearls because y'all, Mrs. Bethune was wearing her pearls, her fur coat, her heels, her cane, her purses. She always had a purse. But I see you today with your red on and your I should have thrown some pink just to remind, hey.
I have to do it sometimes.
You got to do it. I understand. All right, Pastor Dove here, Duval. That's right, Duval. Hello. Yes, yes, yes.
Hey,
Thank you, Doc.
Pastor Dove.
Hey,
Thanks for
thank you
joining
for
in.
joining. Yes, thank you for joining us this evening. So, Dr. Preston, we talk offline a lot about our sources and where we're getting information from. I think I called you a couple of days ago. I was like, girl, I don't know what is going on in people's internet, but I want them to stop this because this is not accurate. And us as historians, we take that stuff seriously. You all don't realize, and I think it's because of the care and the time that we put into researching and making sure that we're saying and we're putting out factual information. We're not just saying something. We are actually researching to get the facts, the truth. And I tell people all the time, please be careful when you resharing and sharing and looking and seeing. People do things for, the likes and all that. But I want you to talk
Mhm.
about and I know we discussed this a little bit. Some of the places that you found some of your information and your photos, because I'm not going. We talked about showing this photo, but I'm not going to show this photo. Probably one of my top three photos of Ms. Bethune is a picture of her going through the airport in LaGuardia. Y'all got to
I
get
might
the
show it. I
see.
might show it.
You
I
might
might
you might
show it.
show it. If you want me to show it, I'll find it, then
Let
I'll
me
show it.
see. Let me
That
see. I might
that
show it. Do I
that
have it? Lord, I
photo,
don't know what page it's on. Oh yeah. Okay, I'll show the photo. Let's see
you
if
gonna
they
show
can
it.
see it.
Okay, just listen. my probably top three photos. I'm always talking about humanizing.
I can't get it right,
I
but
love this photo because tell us a little bit about that picture, sis. Let's talk about that.
okay.
What was she doing?
If I can hold the picture together, I'm holding the wrong way. I don't know why I'm doing it, but anyway, this picture is I'm gonna read the caption. Miss
Okay.
Bethune rushing to a plane that was held for her at LaGuardia Airport when she was late for departure to Paris on her way to Monrovia, Liberia, to attend the inauguration of President Tubman at the request of President Truman, January 3rd, 1952. Mrs. Bethune has on, this is I now end quote, Mrs. Bethune has on her fur, she has a scarf around her neck, she has her pocketbook. She's walking through this airport late. Planes being held for her. She's laced down. She's furred down. She's ready to go. Mind
And
you,
wait for
she's
me.
traveling to Paris, so this is probably like a 12-hour flight, 10-hour flight. But she's cute, honey. She even has on some
She
little heels.
is. She
I don't
is.
travel that way, Miss Bethune.
No, and that's it, y'all. I really listen. I love that picture but wait, y'all, holding the plane
Because I'm going to Africa. I told y'all that was my home, and y'all not keeping me from Africa. Okay.
with my fur and my heel and my hat.
Sorry that I'm late. This is my Miss Bethune voice.
Yes,
But
yes,
it was the train that held me.
yes.
I'm ready.
But y'all gotta see it because it looks like her facial expression. I think that's one of the things too I like about it. It's the facial expression you never see of her. Because we very rarely see her smiling, but on this one, it looks like she was about business and she was getting after in all of her gear. So I want you guys to drop some questions, some comments in the chat. Tell us, what you think about the talks. Ask Dr. Preston some questions while I have her here, guys. Now, while we waiting on some comments and some questions, sis, where are some of the places that you found some of the photos and letters? Just give us not all the secrets, but just a little bit,
I
a
got a
little bit.
whole. I'm looking at a list back here in the back of the book. I'm the
List.
bibliography. If they buy the book, they'll see the sources. They can go to the archives.
Yes.
It's a lot, but you can go. I'm so proud of myself for the research that I put into this book because um, there's so many different archives. There's the Schomburg Center in New York.
Mhm.
I remember making the trek to Schomburg in Harlem when I was in grad school to complete this part of the research. There's also the University of Massachusetts Amherst Library. The Du Bois papers that I used were all online, thank God. And then you have Indiana University. This is where I got some of those beautiful pictures from her trip to Liberia. And they were so
Mm.
gracious. I have pictures of her with Liberia's president, pictures of her with Liberia's first lady. And I even have a few that I didn't actually use in the book. The Library of Congress, being in the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan area is such a blessing in terms of research because you have Library of Congress. You also have Moreland Spingarn Research Center, where some of the papers were the Mary Church Terrell papers and the Max Jurgen papers. And then the NARA, the National Archives, and also the National Archives for Black Women's History, um, where I worked for 2 years as an archives technician. At the time, it was behind the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House, but it has since been relocated to Maryland. But that was a major repository for the photos and a
Mhm.
lot of the research that I was able to do on NCNW. Eleanor Roosevelt's papers, State Archives of Florida. I'm missing one very important one that I can't think of right now, and I'm looking right at the list. Schomburg. Oh, did I say um oh my goodness, the Amherst Museum. I can't think
Oh,
of their name. Oh, why don't I have them? I know they're in here. The Amherst Museum in Canada.
oh, wow.
Shout out to my friends at the Amherst. I don't know why their
Oh,
names didn't appear on this particular list, but they were so gracious in giving me some of the photos, especially some of the photos that document her trip to Canada in
hmm.
1954. Yeah, the National
Okay.
Historic Site in Amherstburg, the Amherstburg Freedom Museum. Thank you all too. Thanks to all of those archives. Everybody was just a
Yes, because
major blessing.
those archives are, I know for me, you're blessed you're able to get into those archives. When I wrote my book, I couldn't get into them. So I had to rely on just emailing and saying, hey, can you give me this photo? But it's a lot of work as a historian, researching, trying to gather this information in order to give just an accurate accounting of Mrs. Bethune and her life. Now, Dr. Preston, can you share just real quick how long was the research and the writing for this book? Because you are the Bethune scholar.
Altogether, altogether, I think this particular book took about 5 years
5
altogether.
years. Yeah, because people like, oh, just I want to just write a book. No, 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 you all. She took 5 years of research
And you
and
and you can just write a
writing.
book. You can quickly just write a book. That's that's
Yeah,
that's doable too. But
yeah.
with all the archives that I visited and all of the newspapers, I didn't even go through the list of newspapers. Chicago Defender, Pittsburgh Courier,
Mm-hmm.
Daytona Times, the list goes on and on and on. There's just so much research that has to be done, particularly because this is a topic that had never been explored. There's no
Mm.
other book that looks at international work. And there
Mm-hmm.
are other books on Mrs. Bethune, but when you talk about international, that means that you have to investigate all of these different places. And so the
Right.
research takes a lot longer, even though this is not a really long book. It was a lot of work to, look at these different places.
Right, 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 right. I just have to commend you because you are, and when I say that you're the Bethune Scholar, and if anyone follows me on social media, I will give you your flowers because you have not only done the research, but you have been blessed with the opportunity to work in two residences of Miss Bethune in Daytona Beach, Florida, and in Washington, D.C. And I don't know about you, but and I say this all the time, Ms. Bethune is such an inspiration. She really motivated me, and I give her credit for where I am today, for this platform, for Heritage Salon, me working in her house. But it's
Mm-hmm.
nothing like being in her home around her things,
Definitely.
being near her dress and her shoes, not only humanizes her, but you have opened the door to a whole new world of Mrs. Bethune that I know I did not know, and I'm quite sure quite a few people did not know all of this global work, this international activism that Mrs. Bethune has done. And so I appreciate you, Dr. Ashley Robertson Preston. I knew you before you was Preston. This is so hard because you my sis. I don't say doctor, but we're gonna put respect on your name this evening, Doctor Preston. Have earned, listen, that title, and I want to thank you so much for joining me this evening, for taking time out away from Carter G, my nephew. My nephew didn't make an appearance. I thought Carter G was going to make an appearance tonight
uh,
to the
he's busy
people.
right now. He's busy. He could have ran through that door and knocked this whole thing over. He don't
Right,
care.
right. Now listen, can you before I show how people can follow you, can you talk a little bit because this is important, my ministry I love. Um being a mother and motherhood, I want you to talk a little bit about Carter G Cares, how people can donate, talk about what you've been doing, because I still believe the Lord's going to give you that $1 million gift. I've said it tonight publicly,
I
okay?
received it.
That you will get that gift because you are doing some work for mothers, for NICU babies, for families, because you were there. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared to say anything about Carter Cares. I do receive that $1 million gift so we can hire someone to take on the role of Carter G Cares. Right now, it's 100% us, and all donations and proceeds go directly to impact NICU families. We don't accept any salaries or anything at Carter G Cares. This organization was born out of my and my husband's experience of having Carter. He was born at 28 weeks. He weighed 1 pound and 4 ounces, and he spent 226 days in the NICU in 2019. So the NICU experience was really hard, a lot of ups and downs. Carter had pneumonia. He had more blood transfusions than I can count. Um, Surgery. He had a trach and a G tube. He had about 4 or 5 different surgeries in the NICU. And when he came home on oxygen, a ventilator, and a feeding tube. Now he's 5 years old. He runs, jumps, skips, plays. He still has a trach and a G tube, but he's no longer on oxygen or ventilator. And he's autistic, and he's doing very well, learning a lot, and just getting to be really strong. And we're hoping that he'll be off of his trach soon. And
In
so
Jesus'
this,
name.
amen. So this organization was started to help NICU families. When we were actually in the
Mhm.
NICU, as we were about to get out of the NICU, we were thinking about how can we give back. I mean, our lives were just transformed by the NICU experience. I had never seen anything like that. I
Mhm.
didn't know anybody that had a baby in the NICU. It was just
Mhm.
interesting. It was scary. You know, I've been sitting in the NICU before, and literally, I heard a baby next to me who the doctors were calling the mom because they didn't think the baby would make it.
Mm.
Um, and so many miracles happen in the NICU.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's a special place, and so we wanted to give back because we spent so much money when he was in the NICU. We spent money on gas, we spent money on food. Think about when you visit the hospital. Um, you pay to park. We didn't pay to park, thank you Jesus. But you know, a lot of people pay to park when they visit the hospital. When you're there, you're gonna get some food. You know, you might spend $20, $30 in a day just sitting at the hospital. And so we thought, how can we help families? And so what some of the things that we do is we buy parking passes for families to distribute. We also we have something called Carter's Corner, where every month we take food to the NICU. We take snacks, we take food for the family so that they don't have to worry about, you know, putting $10 in a vending machine to get out one soda and 2 bags of chips. So we try to help them with that. We also do programs. We have a program coming up in May for mental health awareness, where we have Dr. Narissa Dix, who's going to come on. She's a therapist. She's going to come on and talk about mental health for moms and, you know, how to deal with postpartum, how to deal with stress, because a lot of NICU parents are, they go through a lot of stress. And in fact, I was diagnosed with PTSD from my
Wow.
experience of the NICU, of seeing my child have to be brought back to life so many different times. And so, you
Mm.
know, we do different programs. In August, we do Breastfeeding Awareness Month. We
Mhm.
donate breast pumps, and we have a lactation consultant. Miss Perny Brandt is going to be with us this year to talk to moms about breastfeeding, to give tips. So those are the things that Carter G Cares does. And we are in our 4th year, excited to just keep doing this work. God has really shown us favor. We started a month before the pandemic hit. So, you know, to be able to shift gears
Yes.
and make it through the pandemic, and now to still, be standing and working in two different states. I'm just really thankful that we can still do this. And, as we do Carter G Cares, it helps heal us too. You know,
Yes.
I pray
Yes.
over every basket and every gift that we give to families, but it's healing to us to be able to be in a position to bless the families too. So I'm thankful on all sides.
Yes, yes. And I'm
Andrea,
so, yes, Sora Andrea, thank you. She says, bless you and your family for giving back and helping other families. This
thank
very
you.
sounds very familiar, like Mrs. Bethune giving back, thinking of others. You
Enter
are
to
literally,
learn, depart
it's
to serve,
yes,
honey. I
yes,
heard it when I was down
you,
at Bethune Cookman. I saw the word. I
you
saw the writing on the wall. I am
listen.
not a wildcat, but I was in wildcat
No,
country for about
you
5 years,
you
so I
are
got
honorary
it.
Wildcat. You're honorary Wildcat, sis. Need to get your little shirt to say
I'll wait
no.
for my degree.
Okay. Right. Okay. I hear that. You want your degree. Let's make sure that happens. If I got something to do, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. I want to thank you so much because you didn't just stop with your efforts with telling the story of Ms. Bethune, but you were putting your actions to work by helping these NICU families. And so I want to personally publicly thank you for that,
Thank
for
you.
going above and beyond. I'll talk to you sometime like I'm doing Carter Cares. I gotta get to Sam's, get to Costco, I gotta get
Let
this
me
stuff.
go get the Costco so I can deliver
Right.
this part of care,
Yes,
honey.
yes,
Like
you
actually in the back of my car, groceries to deliver. It's real, y'all. It's not
but
for
you do
play.
it. No, but you do it. You teaching at Howard University. You writing books. You being a mom, a
Oh
wife to
gosh, no.
Marcellus. Shout out, Ro. Okay, my homeboy from
Yes.
Florida. We thank you. Oh, Miss Janet Simswood, thanks for sharing my
Oh,
Shiro.
let me say, Dr. Janet Sims Wood is a major blessing. She actually did the index to my book. And
Whoa.
yes, she did. And she's an incredible author. Please check out her book on Dorothy Porter Wesley, another one of
Oh.
those Howard University women who
Oh.
had played a major role in the founding of Moreland Spingarn Research Center as we know it today. And Dr. Sims Woods is the author of that book. So please check
Oh.
that out.
Dr. Sims, what I need a signed copy. We may need to
She's
exchange.
your
I need to see
soror
you.
too. She's
Oh,
your
she
soror
was.
too.
Oh, I think I did know she was my story. You see,
Yeah,
AKA.
look,
Look at
AKA showing
there.
up,
Yeah,
showing
we
out.
do. We do a little something, something. We're doing something. But
Yeah, that's one of my mamas right there. One of my godmamas
yeah.
right there.
Yes, I see her on social media all the time. She's always supporting. So we thank you, Dr. Sims. I got to get this book. I'm now that I'm no longer in
It's a history
school.
press. It's history
Oh, it's
press.
the
Get it.
history press.
Uh-huh.
Okay, okay. I'm no longer in school. I got time to do some reading. When I'm not, when Dr. Preston is on me, Jada, what's going on with this? She's my accountability partner in this world we call
Gotta do
history.
it.
Okay, gotta
Gotta
do it,
do
gotta
it.
do it. Thank you, Sword. Pink and yes, because we strive in excellence as well. Okay, we
All
we do.
right.
We do. But I want to thank you, Dr. Preston, for coming. If people want to contact Dr. Preston, follow her on Instagram. Also, I don't know what happened, but she's also on Twitter. What's your handle on Twitter, Dr. Preston?
Girl, I don't know.
I,
Let me
I
see.
have it on here and it disappeared. But
Preston is Dr. Preston 1913.
okay, because she popping over there in the X world. Okay. I don't be popping on the X world. Like, you gotta help me, sis, because I'm not over there that much. I go
It's work.
once a year. Right. Another platform. I got to find out how I can do it all at once. Well,
I'm
I schedule
actually
some
on
things.
TikTok now too, but I'll
You
let
on
y'all
TikTok?
live.
You on the tickety tockety with the kids, girl?
Yes, the legacy keeper.
The
I'm
legacy
trying
key,
to.
and here on Instagram, the legacy keeper. But I want to thank you, Dr. Preston, for joining me this evening. This has been a long time coming. You know, I'm always going to educate my audiences about history, about Ms. Bethune, because she is one of the people that inspired me to start here at the salon. And so anytime I have an opportunity to expose people to our history, accurate history, I'm going to give it. And I appreciate you taking your time, your evening, to come on and speak to my audience about Mary McLeod Bethune, the Pan Africanist. And listen, you all need to get her book. Do not forget. Oh, what is the code? I got to give y'all the discount code for coming on. Do we have that
It's
code?
AAIH is in happening 24.
Okay, you heard it here. This is a discount code to get Dr. Press's book. Okay, AAIH24. I'm going to drop it here in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you use that code to get a discount. Okay. Now that means you may have to catch up with her when she's traveling across the country and the world, speaking to signing. But go and support these Black authors. Support the work. Go so
Thank
you can
you.
get some detail of that picture. We gave a sneak peek because I wasn't going to give it to you, Dr. Preston. You know, she was nice. Because I was like, nah, they need to buy the book. But I
Oh,
want
it's
you guys to
cool.
purchase this book, learn more about Mrs. Bethune, especially my Bethune Cookman Wildcats. You know, we know so much about her being a founder of our school and all the things in the house and all the crazy stories about Mrs. Bethune. We know she's a Delta, but she was so much more a humanitarian, a philanthropist, advocate for social justice in Florida, and her global work, Dr. Preston shared with us this evening. So I want to thank you all for joining us. The 4th year, Dr. Preston, I've been doing this for 4 years, and I thank you because you made sure I
Uh,
pressed my way through because I'd be like, "Ugh, maybe I shouldn't." Dr. Preston's like,
keep
no,
going.
keep going. And so this is the 4th annual Women's History Talk that I've done, HS Talk, and I'm so excited about what's to come. I got some more things in store that we're going to do, but I appreciate you joining us this evening. Be sure you follow Dr. Preston here at the Legacy Keeper on Instagram. Donate to Carter G Cares, okay, so we can help these NICU families. But I thank you all for being here this evening. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
Dr. Preston. We appreciate you. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.